Good afternoon. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Ted Clement. I'm the Executive Director of Save Mount Diablo. Today, we have a special gift of gratitude and inspiration for you, our supporters. This afternoon's Zoom presentation about Mount Diablo's historic beacon, the Eye of Diablo, by John Gallagher. John is one of our wonderful, long-serving Save Mount Diablo board members, and he is also a beacon expert. He has taken care of the Eye of Diablo for years, along with lighting it and educating the public about this important resource. Other wonderful Save Mount Diablo volunteers like Dick Heron and staff have helped with this too. John is also a personal friend and a bandmate in our Save Mount Diablo house band, Blue-Eyed Grass. Save Mount Diablo traditionally lights the beacon every December 7th for National Pearl Harbor Remembrance Day, and we help put on a ceremony with our good partners at California State Parks, Sons and Daughters of Pearl Harbor Survivors, Chapter 5, and CSU East Bay Concord campus. Now, Save Mount Diablo is making sure our beacon provides extra unifying and inspiring light for our communities during these dark times. When we lift our eyes to the beacon light every Sunday evening after sunset until sunrise on Monday, with this process run by Save Mount Diablo volunteers and staff, we are of course also collectively looking up to our beloved Mount Diablo and nature. Nature is perhaps the greatest unifier, and getting out and connecting meaningfully and responsibly with nature during times of crisis like the current times is especially important, as we know nature can help us heal physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. Gratefully, because of your wonderful support, our Save Mount Diablo staff continue to work hard on conserving our critical Mount Diablo natural areas here. Together, we will continue to do great things to protect the ultimate foundation for our long-term health and well-being, nature. Please take it away, and I hope you all enjoy.
We're going to talk today about how the beacon had significance and how it changed over the years. It was part of a national program back in the 1920s when aviation was in its infancy. So you see this biplane with, for you motorheads, a great big engine in it, and this little tiny US mail truck. And they wanted to, during the early 1920s, they were promoting airmail as a new form to get mail across the country in a much more quick way than on the train. And the problem was, in the days before we had radar, our airplanes could not fly at night. And so, again, this is the early 20s, they started to build a series of beacons that would shine at night. They would be approximately 10 miles from one another, and a pilot could fly from beacon to beacon. And the beacon, of course, would light his way. He would arrive at one and look down as he flew over the beacon. And there was even an arrow in the concrete foundation that would point to the next beacon in the row. They had these all over the country, hundreds and hundreds of them, generally on a tower with small lights, relatively small lights that would rotate at night. This photo or this drawing on the left, you can see a tower, and the little building would have been a generator station. Of course, electricity was still relatively new out in the more rural areas of the country too. And it was a big deal back then. The Commerce Department, the Post Office, citizens all over the country were very much behind this new program to provide navigation at night. So these paths across the country, both east and west and north and south, were provided. Again, this is long before interstate highways and so forth. Here is one. I put this in because our own Ted was just up at the summit of Mount Shasta last week. Couldn't resist this. This is a tower. Of course, this is not 1928. You can tell by the car. This shot was taken around 1960 or so. And the Richfield would be the Richfield Oil Company. Many of these beacons were financed by oil companies and other large corporations back in the day, looking toward airmail and then other forms of commerce. That tower, as you can see, stands today. This is Google Street View on the right, on the approach to Mount Shasta City. The Interstate I-5 has bypassed this tower, but it's still there. That was a cute little gas station. It's still there. You can see Mount Shasta in the background. And today at the top of the tower is a great big osprey nest that you can recognize. So what about locally? Here is a Google Earth view of one of these pads. The center square would have held the tower. They were 60, 70 feet tall typically. If possible, the towers were put on a ridge or high up whenever they could. And those arrows that you can see point to the next beacon. This is a very unusual one because we have two arrows, and thus this was a sort of an intersection where a pilot flying north could decide which pathway to take to the next beacon. And I mentioned that this is about local. Anybody recognize the mountain in the background? I feel like a school teacher with that. That is in fact Mount Diablo, and the buildings in the foreground are Walnut Creek. And this tower, or this concrete pad with the two arrows, is on Akalani's Ridge open space. You can walk to it today. The arrow in the foreground points north toward Highway 99, as if somebody were to fly up to, say, Portland. And the one on the right heads to Sacramento and then to Reno. And it is still there today. Of course, you can tell because it's all covered with graffiti. So what about our beacon, the one on Mount Diablo? Well, I mentioned the Richfield Oil Company. Standard Oil of California was not to be left behind in this competition. They agreed to finance the construction of some 5 beacons up and down the West Coast: Seattle, Portland, Los Angeles, San Diego, and of course, up on Mount Diablo. These were not ordinary beacons. These were 10 times as bright as the brightest we had of all of these other ones. They were no small undertaking, a significant project for Standard Oil at the time. One could look at it cynically and say, of course, these oil companies that are behind this are going to sell more gasoline, which is certainly true. But this is about commerce. It was endorsed by the Department of Commerce. It was endorsed by the Post Office. Aviation companies, of course, were behind the whole thing. Ours was built in 1928, March of 1928. This article from the San Francisco Chronicle says there, Lindy to set Standard Oil lamps alight. And in fact, it was Charles Lindbergh who, via remote control, lit the first of this series of 5 beacons, first and second. This one and the one in Los Angeles were lighted in April of 1928. Lindbergh at the time was a national hero. He had only flown across to Paris the previous May, 11 months before, May of 1927. And at the time, of course, with aviation in its infancy, Lindbergh became an instant hero. nationwide, internationally, people were showering him with awards. So this is a big deal for the nation and for commerce, an inspiring time for everybody. It's the Roaring '20s, and to have a celebrity like this light the beacon was an exciting time, to say the least. It was promoted everywhere. One of my favorite photos that I just found recently, thanks to Steve Minier, it was even local. California Bartlett's, this would be Bishop Ranch pears, and we always call it the Diablo Beacon, and here's a fruit crate from the same period, perhaps in the 30s, advertising our fruit using the beacon. So what about our beacon itself? What was it like? Well, in 1928, Mount Diablo was still in private hands, and thus Standard Oil had to seek permission from the owner of the property, who is a businessman in Oakland, a fellow named Walter Frick, who in fact is an unsung hero of the formation of Mount Diablo State Park. Almost nobody knows his name, and in fact, all of us should know his name. Seth Adams has written a very nice biography, a well-researched biography of Walter Frick and who he was and what he did. He was the one who sold the first parcels to the state in 1931 to actually form the state park. Anyway, likewise, our founder, Mary Bowerman, when she was doing her doctoral studies on Mount Diablo, had to seek permission to tramp around the mountain from this very same man. So anyway, the tower went up. It's about, to the platform at the top is about 70 feet. So the filament of the light is at about 75 feet. To give you a feel for the scale, the SD, Standard Diablo, the S is about 12 feet tall. The D is 8 feet tall, and they shined at night. They were lighted, blinking in Morse code. It was a real achievement to have this thing shining around the Bay Area as we can see it today. And then, of course, at the end of 1929, we had the stock market crash, and the Depression plunged us into the Great Depression. And during the early stages of Mount Diablo State Park, what did we have but the CCC come and work? Most of us are aware of that, the wonderful stonework that we see up and down the mountain, the stoves, the picnic tables, and culverts and so forth, all done by the CCC. Trails were built by them. And toward the end of the 30s, in fact, in 1939, the CCC started construction of the Summit building. So here is a photo of the summit. You can see the viewing platform in the background, a big flagpole, a great big pile of stone. That would certainly be the stonework that was locally quarried to build the building in the first place. And in the very foreground, down at the bottom, is the shadow of the tower that the beacon is on. You can even see the shadow of the beacon. A delightful photo with Morgan Territory and what is today Brentwood in the background. So the beacon was taken down in 1939. The construction was started here. You can imagine the pride that these workers of the CCC felt as the beacon was placed up on this especially built turret. The turret itself is placed exactly on the summit of Mount Diablo. If you could look straight down from the newly placed beacon, there is rock there. If you visited the visitor center, you can stand on the very summit and you are directly beneath the building or beneath the turret. I enjoy this photo because of the beautiful OSHA-approved scaffold around it and the telephone pole crane that was used to lift materials up. And on the right-hand side, the railing for the building, for the beacon is there as well. Now, so this is April of 1941 when this building was completed. Again, a great source of pride for our Civilian Conservation Corps. Of course, that was one of FDR's big projects, make work projects of the Depression. And the beacon was turned on again, April of 1941. Same timing, an astronomical clock turned it on at night, turned it off in the morning. Everything was automatic, given the day. And then, of course, December of 1941, we all know Pearl Harbor happened. This is the Arizona. And for those that don't remember this, I mean, I don't remember it personally, of course, 1,177 men were lost on the Arizona alone. It was another huge event for the United States. And those of us in California may have learned about the West Coast blackout. Of course, a beacon such as ours would very nicely work for the enemy as well. And on December 8th, here's the documentation. December 8th, the beacon was turned off as to the blackout up and down the West Coast. The others were turned off in the same fashion. So all of a sudden, the beacon took on a different kind of significance, the blackout during World War II. At the end of World War II, we had radar. And the beacon was, at that point, obsolete. So now it's 1945. There's no need to turn the beacon back on. It was in a state park. We don't know for sure, but we believe the other beacons were taken down and scrapped for the war effort. The fact that our beacon was in a park probably saved its life, as it were. The other four, as far as we know, are gone, and this is the only beacon of its type in the world today. So the beacon remained off, dormant, until 1964. And some Pearl Harbor survivors came up with the idea that maybe the beacon should be relighted in honor of Pearl Harbor Day, those who survived, and of course those who did not, that fateful day. And Admiral Nimitz, Chester W. Nimitz, who was the commander of the Pacific Fleet at the end of World War II, had retired to Berkeley. So they enlisted Admiral Nimitz to come out to light the beacon on this day. And it was quite an event. Again, it made the newspapers and so forth. And I have to throw this in. I've given a lot of beacon talks over the last several years, and I always ask this question. I do not have or have ever seen a photo of that ceremony when Admiral Nimitz came out from Berkeley and went up to Mount Diablo to turn the beacon on. Nobody has come up with a photo. I even went to the Admiral Nimitz Museum in Texas, asked about it there, and they had nothing. So if anybody out there has a lead for a photo, we certainly would like to see it. So anyway, December of 1964, the beacon was turned on only on December 7th. And our Pearl Harbor survivors would and do come out and meet with us as we light the beacon. And it continued to shine, and it was working. But in December of 2009, we had a significant snowfall. A major storm came in on December 7th, 2009. The road was closed. We were unable to hold the lighting ceremony up at the summit with the road closed, snow on the road and so forth. Volunteers, Bert Bogardus and Dick Heron, hiked to the summit to turn the beacon on and then spent 45 minutes pushing it because it was so cold, it would not rotate on its own. So at that point, our executive director, Ron Brown, thought, well, wouldn't that be a good idea if Save Mount Diablo restored the beacon? And asked one of our great volunteers, Dick Heron, if that would be possible and if he was interested in leading the project. And he enlisted several people. We started having meetings with the state and the historians and so forth. And we were told that it wasn't possible, that we weren't capable of undertaking such a project. It was a public works project. It was going to have to go out to bid and have restoration firms take care of the whole thing. And that was that. Ron didn't really like that answer, and he contacted our Assemblywoman, Joan Buchanan, about the whole thing. And she, in fact, went to the Assembly with a bill to allow Save Mount Diablo, a nonprofit, to restore the Eye of Diablo. And it went through the Assembly, passed, went through the State Senate, passed, signed by Jerry Brown. And at that point, December 7th, fortuitously 2012, at the beacon lighting, we have the head of the Department of Parks and Recreation, Major General Anthony Jackson, a retired Marine. There's Joan Buchanan, Ron Brown, Park Superintendent Roland Gabert, and District Superintendent Danita Rodriguez. With this legislation, it was a complete turnaround in the attitude of the state. They became incredibly helpful and supportive of the project. They were great to work with. They came up with information from their archives for us, anything. They were just terrific. Ron started the fundraising. We didn't really know how much it was going to cost, but the Lesher Foundation came through with a matching grant. The funds came in, and then another significance of the beacon came around, and that was with community support. Shell Oil came through and said, we'll provide the crane and the riggers to take the beacon down and put it back for you. So they came up, drove that crane, that incredible crane, up to the summit early one morning in 2013. And we sort of handed the project over to them, and they lifted up that beacon just like that and set it on our trailer. And down it came to a warehouse in Concord. This is in North Concord. Again, one of our volunteers who had seen in a newspaper article that we were going to do this project, and he thought it was a cool project. He would agree to provide the secure space for the beacon. And equally important was the forklift, and even more important was his help. Rex Bothell became one of our integral parts of this, as he would, if he didn't operate the forklift, one of his employees operated the forklift so we could move the beacon around. And we were showing up on a regular basis all the summer of 2013. Here's what it looks like sitting in the warehouse. Looks kind of forlorn, although it still was functioning. The front cover, the glass cover was broken in several locations. The paint had been chipping and peeling away, and we went to work. On the left is one of our beacon boys, John Stewart, who was an enormous help with the electrical work, control panel design. And on the right is Alan Frank, one of our great finds. He has a PhD in optical physics. And he was a great help as we studied the brightness and so forth of the beacon and how it would shine once we got it back up on the mountain. Here is a photo that I rather like. As you can see, it's looking straight into the beacon. Well, I can tell you the beacon is way brighter than that. The light bulb right then is shining with 5 or 10 volts only. We had turned it way down so that we could evaluate the beam of the beacon and so on. So another company stripped the paint for us, and then we were ready to put it back up on the mountain. The problem was we were ready to paint it and we didn't know what color it was. There were 9 coats of paint on the beacon. There was a sort of a brown and a sort of a green, even international orange, which is the same color as the Golden Gate Bridge, was on the beacon at one point. We don't know when. And we didn't really know what was appropriate. We had this nice photo very clearly. This is the beacon right after the summit building was completed. Look at the old cars there. A week before we were scheduled to paint, again, the state came through and said they found a color photo. These are the same cars as in that black and white. And look at that, the beacon was silver. We don't know when it had been repainted the other colors, but very clearly when it was brand new, it was silver. So back up the mountain, October of 2013, at dawn, driving back up the hill. Again, the crane showed up, swinging the beacon back in. The red aircraft obstruction light, the red blinking light that you see every night, is there, having been restored as well. And then we finally anchored the beacon and everything. This is one of the riggers from Shell standing on the railing. Anybody want his job to stand up there? He just said, no big deal, it's what we do every day. So our Pearl Harbor survivors, of course, came up. No, this photo was not upside down. This is 3 of them reflected in the reflector of the beacon itself. So they are turned upside down optically, not physically. So the beacon is back up. It has been a source of inspiration and pride for our Pearl Harbor survivors. It was, they were so proud to be, that the beacon honors them in this way, and of course even more so honors those soldiers that did not come home from Pearl Harbor. And they look forward to this date every December 7th. And Save Mount Diablo continues to light the beacon in that way. And then, and the other, for those of us that worked with the beacon, another source of personal significance was how the community came forward. That when we had articles in the newspaper and on television that this beacon, the Eye of Diablo, is going to be restored, people came out of the woodwork to say, that's a cool project, can I help? Is there something I can do? Even the Diablo woodworkers, of course, the whole beacon is steel and aluminum and brass and so on. The Diablo woodworkers said, hey, if there's anything you need, well, sure enough, they made us a box to hold the extra glass that we have. the community response was honestly heartwarming. For me, second only to meeting the Pearl Harbor survivors was that. And then, of course, today, this year, the significance, I don't want to say changed, it has been added to. The Pearl Harbor significance and connection there is certainly still very much present and in our minds. And two of our supporters, I believe they're on this Zoom talk today, Cindy Tolan and Ken Holmes, independently contacted Save Mount Diablo and TED and asked about whether lighting the beacon would be a suitable thing in honor of those workers who were still working during the shutdown and so on. Ted picked up that idea and ran with it. He first contacted Eddie Guaracha, the superintendent of the Diablo Range District. And Eddie said, gee, that's a really good idea. And then Ted called me and asked if it was a good idea that if maybe Dick Heron and I could light the beacon, taking turns every Sunday night. And I went, wow, what a good idea. But before you even go any further, you need to contact the Pearl Harbor survivors. I don't want to diminish from the significance that that the beacon has for them. So Ted contacted them right away, and here's one of them, Chuck Kohler, who wrote back in an email. It would seem selfish of us to not share, especially if it might help and comfort those who suffer during these difficult and trying times. Chuck is one of our great ambassadors for Pearl Harbor and for the beacon itself. He's there, by the way, chatting with Bert Bogardus, a retired ranger who took care of the beacon for about 25 years while he was a ranger and then as a retiree. Eddie Guaracha, the district superintendent, wrote, as we look up to the sky, let this beacon remind us we are not alone. Our thoughts and support are with the heroes and healthcare workers and emergency workers, all of whom are affected by this worldwide pandemic. Let the light give us hope for a better future and remind us to keep our heads and spirits up. After the beacon had been lighted, we started lighting it on Easter Sunday. We started getting other comments. Seeing the beacon has been one of the positive highlights of this difficult time. Thanks. Here is the beacon at dawn. This is one of Ted's photos. The way we are doing this is Dick and I take turns lighting the beacon on Sunday nights, and Ted, being a hopeless morning person, is privileged in a way, but it's all in a day's work for him to be up at dawn. So Dick and I get the sunset photos, but Ted gets these fabulous photos of the dawn before he turns off the beacon on Monday mornings. Finally, my name is Alice. I'm an RN and I'm taking care of COVID patients. I want to thank you for lighting the beacon every Sunday. And this is another dawn photo. There in the background is the shadow of Mount Diablo and the beacon casted over Walnut Creek and the East Bay. So think about this as we, I managed to not plug in a photo of somebody wearing a mask, but when we go up, we do wear a mask and light the beacon. I said when we started lighting the beacon that we don't have to light it for very long. we do intend to turn it off well before Pearl Harbor Day so as to not diminish the significance of that date. But so far, we are still shining the beacon, and for the foreseeable future, we will continue to do that. So I'm going to turn it over to Ted and Karen and see what they have to say, if there are questions to look at and so on.
Someone had asked what the CCC was, and Ted kindly responded it was the Civilian Conservation Corps. And there was another question about how long was the beacon extinguished during World War II, and Dick Heron was kind enough to respond to that one, that it was off from December 8th, 1941 until after World War II was over. It was not functional until it was rebuilt in 1964. Sure. How much was the beacon weigh? And someone else wanted to know how they get to the beacon.
Okay. First, that was a source of fun for us because we did not know how much the beacon weighed. But as we were looking for information as much as possible, I mean, we tried to find everything we could learn. And the beacon itself was made by Sperry in Delaware. And we contacted them and their archives. I think that Sperry is now part of DuPont, if I'm not mistaken. And we found a bill of lading, and the bill of lading showed 2,000 pounds. And so that was our best indicator, and that's the number that we used to tell Shell what size of crane we needed to lift the thing down. And of course, that crane is all computerized and so forth. And the crane operator told us that the computer told him that the beacon weighed 1,400 pounds. Didn't exactly have a scale to weigh it for real, but 1,400 pounds is good enough for me. How do I get to the beacon? The beacon is up at the summit of the mountain. Drive to the top. Currently, the last bit of road to the summit of the mountain is closed to automobiles, but you can walk to the summit. It's a very short hike after driving, and the beacon is right up at the very top of the summit building.
Another one is, how long did the entire restoration process take?
Well, it depends on how you count. Because of the stumbling blocks that we had about doing the project in the first place, we had actually years of planning before we actually did any work. And so we thought about how to coordinate this project. And then we had a whole lot of work to get done before we could actually lift the beacon off. You can imagine the nuts and bolts that held it down were in bad shape, rusted, lots of old roofing material that needed to be chipped away. Much of it had lead or asbestos in it. That had to be done in a hazmat type of fashion. And we finally took the beacon down in June of 2013. And that's when the real work started, and we put it back up the following October 2013. So about 5 months of actual work when the beacon was off.
Got it.
One of the little fun anecdotes, the Morgan fire was in September of 2013. It went up clear to the summit when we were doing the work on the beacon. And there was a fun quote. One of the spokespersons for the state park, of course, they were being interviewed extensively while the fire was burning. And one of the reporters asked if the beacon was okay. And the spokesperson said, "Oh yes, of course, we've been watching over the beacon like a mother hen watching over her chicks." Well, at the time, the beacon was in the warehouse in Concord, completely away from the fire.
Oh, that's a good one. Have there been any measures taken to preserve the beacon against earthquake risk?
Yeah, that's that was the whole earthquake thing was not part of our project, of course. The building itself is one would like to say it's unreinforced masonry, but the fact is it was, we think, we're not really sure about this, there is no documentation that we have, considering that the light was taken down and the tower was disassembled in 1939, and the beacon was not relighted until 1941. I'm quite comfortable, but it is speculation, that in fact the steel from the tower was used as a skeleton to build the beacon. So while earthquake building codes and stuff certainly didn't exist in 1939, given that that skeleton is there holding up the stone, and is very heavy stone, as a non-structural engineer, of course, I'm guessing that the earthquake problem is minor. If there's an earthquake big enough for that building, it's the least of our problems.
Got it. What type of lens is on the beacon, and how many lumens is the light?
It's a regular reflector lens. Many people have asked if it's a Fresnel lens, and no, it's not. It's a regular reflector, very much the same as a Boy Scout flashlight. A light bulb with a reflector in the back, a parabolic reflector. That was one of the things that we mold. Since the reflector itself is still in very good condition. It isn't excellent. You know, there are some pock marks and a coating behind it and so on, but it still is very functional. And considering that the gasket that holds the reflector in place is asbestos, and of course we wanted nothing to do with a risk of breaking the reflector. We chose to leave it in place and did not disturb it. So the reflector is still there, just as it was when the light was built in 1928. As far as lumens is concerned, most of the beacons across the country were 1 million candle power. I know that's an obsolete measure. And ours is 10 million candle power, a good deal brighter and bigger than the other beacons. Well, I should mention that the reflector is 3 feet in diameter.
What did you replace when rebuilding the beacon?
What did we replace? The glass on the front cover had been broken in numerous locations over the years. Some of it had been replaced with plexiglass, even silicon caulk. It looked awful, and the rest of it, the glass itself, it's not one piece. It's in glass slats, each about 3 inches wide, and it was in such bad shape that we knew it would need to, well, some of it was missing. We knew we needed to replace that. And that's when we got in touch with Alan Frank, the physicist that I mentioned. We didn't know what kind of glass would be appropriate for it. And he was such a great find. I went to his house with a sample of the old glass, and he held it up to the light, and I'm serious, he was doing trigonometry in his head, evaluating what kind of glass it is. We finally came to the conclusion that it was regular ordinary window glass that you buy any place. It was a 1/4 inch thick. We replaced it with 3/16 inch glass, thicker, more resistant to anybody trying to throw a rock at it. And of course, the gasket that held the glass was asbestos. We replaced that with fiberglass.
When lighted, how far away can the beacon's light be seen?
You tell me.
Yeah, I know that's a tough one. Depends on the conditions, right?
We have had people all over the greater Bay Area tell us that they can see the beacon. My son lives in Redwood City, and the first time that I was at the summit and turned it on, he was right on the bay, looking at the beacon right from Redwood City, south of the airport, and he said, "Tell me when it comes around." And I looked at the beacon, and as it rotated toward Redwood City, I'd say, "Now." 10 seconds later, "Now," and so on. And he said, "Yeah, I can see it." So they're Redwood City. And I have a personal friend also who lives up in Sonoma, and he can see Mount Diablo from his house. And yes, he can see the beacon. It has to be a pretty clear night, but he can see the beacon from there. People out in the Delta, Stockton, Lodi can see the beacon easily. And if I remember right, somebody from Davis said they could see the beacon. So pretty darn long way.
We just had a comment that people have seen the beacon in Elk Grove outside Sacramento. On December 7th, is there a time to know to be able to attend the lighting? I do know that Save Mount Diablo publicizes exactly when the lighting will happen on December 7th.
So the program usually starts about 3:45 at CSU East Bay, their Concord campus, and we light the beacon remotely, or the survivors light the beacon remotely from the campus. So if you're there by 4 o'clock, you're good. There's a couple of speakers before it's lit at 5, and parking is always free on the campus that day. So we welcome everybody to come, and hopefully this year that will be no exception.
Great.
Yep.
Okay.
Yes.
What time on Sunday nights does the beacon get turned on?
We turn it on at sundown. Likewise, since you just mentioned December 7th too, we also turn it on at sundown then, but sundown on December 7th is around 5 o'clock. Sundown right now is about 8:30.
Got it.
And it's kind of fun to ask. I live in Danville, and I checked to see when sundown is, and last Sunday night, I think it was 8:31. But from the mountain, it's 3 or 4 minutes later, simply because of the altitude. So that's kind of a fun deal. Anyway, we turn it on at sundown, and as you saw from Ted's great photos, we turn it off right at sunrise.
Right. How complex is the process to turn the beacon on?
Well, it's thanks to great work first by Burt Bogardus. Years ago, I believe it was in the 1980s, Burt had rewired and fabricated a whole new control panel, and it was sort of a legend that there was only one man who knew how to turn the beacon on, and of course that would be Burt. And then his control panel had served for years and years and years. It worked incredibly well, but as part of this and as part of a new panel for the red light, the blinking light at the top, our beacon boy, John Stewart, that I mentioned earlier, designed a whole new control panel. And there is a switch to turn on the main panel, and then a switch for the lamp, and a switch to turn on the motor. Click, click, and it's on. The hard part of turning on the beacon is it's 3 ladders to get up to where the beacon is. 2 ladders.
Bruce Erickson, who is up at the beacon quite often, had a pilot tell him that he saw the beacon coming in to cruising level out of LA. That would be something to see. A lot of people are seeing the beacon. Wow. In Woodside, over at the top of Skyline.
I have a wonderful, I didn't include it in this talk just in the interest of time. I have a wonderful diagram from back in the day showing the compass bearings that a pilot would use as he approaches the beacon, and he knows what compass bearing to follow to get to each of the airports in the bay. It even includes Crissy Field in San Francisco.
Wow.
Bearing to the Livermore Airport, to the Concord Airport, San Mateo, and so forth. Again, back in the day, though, it was the whole system was, in my mind, very quaint, but it worked quite well back in those days. One other little thing, most of the beacons that were across the country, the beam was faced upwards a degree or two, degree and a half, something like that. Our beacon being so high up on a mountain with nothing around it, which is of course why we have the wonderful view of Mount Diablo, our beacon is set to face downwards a couple of degrees.
How many years ago was it that the beacon was restored?
2013.
13, okay. And then there was another one asking about Save Mount Diablo. Does Save Mount Diablo continue to finance the cost of keeping the beacon lit?
Yes, we are. We do have a fund that is earmarked that we don't spend on anything else, and so no problem with that. I see on the chat here that my partner on this, Dick Heron, has a little correction about the thickness of the glass. It was originally 1/4 inch thick, and it's now 5/16.
Oh, and he mentioned the things that were replaced as well. Both main bearings, metal retainers for the glass, asbestos gasket for the glass was replaced with fiberglass. The sheet metal doghouse that covers the base of the beacon, made by a shop in San Ramon. It's really nice that so much was done and all the resources were from local shops and local businesses. It's really a community effort.
Since Dick mentioned the bearing, I'll bring it up. When we disassembled the bearing or the beacon at the warehouse in Concord, again, thanks to the forklift, the bearing, it was a regular old ball bearing, except big. And Dick and I stared at each other saying, how are we going to get that off? Well, the fact is, I have a bearing puller, but in no way is it big enough to pull something as big as that. So back to our friends at Shell in Martinez, and they came out and said, oh, we'll get that off. And they came out with their bearing pullers and torches and so forth. And in 5 minutes, the bearing was off. And then the foreman of the machine shop there in Martinez said, let me take that back to the shop and see if I can find you another one. And Dick and I looked at each other and paused and hesitated. This is the only bearing, this is the only one.
Wow.
And we finally said, okay. And the foreman took it back to the shop and he called us about an hour later and said, I've got 2. Do you want sealed or non-sealed? Put them on the shelf, and they gave us the bearing. I just need to put in one other thing. My last slide shows the photographers, but also some acknowledgements of some of the people that were so helpful and supportive of the whole Beacon project. But above all, the community that came out to help us. I mentioned the warehouseman, Rex Bothell, who I believe is on, Scott Miner, a welder from Las Positas College, and over and over and over again, people that came, Redwood Painting that removed the toxic paint. They provided all the hazmat disposal, painted the beacon, and just did another paint job on it this last year. They were just terrific to work with, and so on. So as I mentioned, for the significance that the community coming out and helping us with this was truly heartwarming. That was one of the, as I said, second to meeting the Pearl Harbor veterans. That was the best part of the whole project.
John, thank you again for the presentation and for all your outstanding service. And of course, big thanks to other people who are helping with this effort to light the beacon every Sunday during these trying times, especially shout out to Dick Heron along with you, John. I want to acknowledge Karen and Joanne, as well as Shannon from our SMD staff team. They've been doing so much to help put on this regular Zoom series about how nature heals and inspires us. So I just want to say thank you to my fellow team members, and of course to all of you outstanding supporters. You've enabled us to stay so strong and so positive amidst all that's happening. We continue to have great success with our land conservation mission. Because of all of you, we could not be more grateful. Stay well, and please also be on the lookout for upcoming additional Zoom presentations in our series about how nature heals and inspires. Be well, everyone, and thank you.
Thank you, everybody.